Hi, this is Louise again. Now you can actually see what I look like, so this is good. Some of you may have met me before, but most of you have not, I don't think. So a little bit about me and my background. I started out as a special education teacher. I got my master's degree in teaching deaf and hard of hearing from Northwestern University back a few decades ago. And I did teach deaf and hard of hearing middle school and high school students for quite a few years. The high school that I taught at became a regional center for deaf and hard of hearing high school kids up in the northern suburbs of Chicago. We at one point had 80 deaf and hard of hearing students in this high school, which was remarkable and truly a model, I believe, for how it is best to educate, especially students with low incidence disabilities such as deafness. They were a presence at that school, and they were mainstreamed into many of the regular classes with sign language interpreters and so forth. They were on football teams and on the homecoming court, and really an integral part of the school. So I directed that program actually for quite a few years, and then my family and I moved to the Twin Cities, where I decided to go back to school, work on a PhD. And I was at the University of Minnesota in the educational psychology department, primarily studying cognitive psychology, how the brain works, how people learn. We're going to talk about that in this class, and doing some research in local schools. And I thoroughly enjoyed that program and being part of that and doing some research in that area. And after then I completed that program, I, for a few years, worked for a small consulting company here in the Twin Cities called Designs for Learning. It was started by way of a major grant by Joe Nathan, who is a school reform expert, still doing some work in school reform in the area here. Wayne Jennings, who was a school administrator at the time, he's still doing some writing and speaking. And we worked together with a team of people at implementing a new model of school and studying the effects of it, both here in Minnesota and in places across the country. And in the process of that, I also visited several other school reform models who were part of the same grant and learned something about what was going on in the way of developing schools and school programs that not only fit the way students learn and how we know people learn, but also being designed for 21st century learning, 21st century skills, training teachers in those models, and so forth. And that led eventually to a sabbatical study that I did several years later, which I'll talk about in a minute. But after a few years working with Designs for Learning and doing some other consulting, I joined the faculty at Bethel University in about the year 2000 or so. Taught educational psychology in the undergrad program and also taught some grad classes. And then around, 2006 or 7 or so, I became chair of the education department, the undergrad program, and then led that program for several years. We were part of some new educational reforms in the program as well, and had a wonderful faculty. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I retired finally from there in 2016 and have now been retired, but continuing to teach this course, which I love and which I developed probably, a decade ago or so. At the time when I first started teaching it, it was a face-to-face course on campus. And now, of course, it's online, and I talked a little bit about that earlier. But during my years at Bethel, I did 2 sabbatical studies, one of them on school reform and what schools and educators are doing across the country to do things differently and uniquely, and models that had evidence that they were working well relative to student learning. You'll hear more about that in session 4, because I'll go through some of that research and my travels and people I interviewed and schools that I visited and talk to you about that. And then I did another sabbatical study a few years later on teacher education reform. That's not integrated into this course so much, but that was a fascinating study too. And I also, in those years, and I'm still doing this actually, participated several times in some courses at Harvard University. They run a program in the Harvard Graduate School of Education called Project Zero, which was really started by Howard Gardner. And then they run conferences called the Future of Learning. I've been to at least 3 of those, one in Boston, one in London, one in Amsterdam. So if you want to take one of these programs, you could go anywhere in the world. And this past summer, actually, I was there again in Boston for a week on a conference about deeper learning. You're going to learn more about that program and those programs and some of the things I have come away with from participating in those Harvard courses in session 5. So you'll get a little bit of input into some of my work, both in the past years and currently. So that is pretty much me and my professional journey. I'm actually now in retirement. Besides teaching this course, I'm kind of putting together a book of some of my, try to pull together some of the things I've learned over the years on these topics. And I'm delighted to be part of this course again, and I'm really delighted to be co-teaching it with Meg. And I think it'll be a good course. We'd like to get feedback from you as well as time goes on. And if you have suggestions or if you have questions or things aren't clear, please feel free to be transparent about that and let us know. So more about each other as we go forward. Thank you for being in this course. Bye.